This is a sandy area, and it's in a much drier area. So disturbances like this ATV track that's been run through here, repeated disturbances, it's actually a very fragile ecosystem, even though you look around and you can see the trees that are growing here. But with repeated disturbance, you can take it right back to sand. So this is an example of what happens when you degrade an ecosystem. And here you can see how the vegetation is holding on to the soil here. On the top, we've got our biocrust, and that's growing on the very nutrient poor soil, and that's gradually changing it over so that it's more hospitable for other species to grow. And on the top you can see we've got things like wild strawberry and yarrow and all these different ferns, and then we got some more grasses coming in the back, and then eventually it transitions into more woody species in the back there. But it's this successional process in the front that I wanted to show you, and I wanted to show you the root system, just how far down they're growing into here. You have your more rhizomatous roots, and then you have your more fibrous root systems. So all these things are working together, holding the soil, and you can see that all this is your organic matter. And if you take it away, all you're left with is sand. You've disturbed the site, you've killed the plant material, and you've released a lot of the nutrients back into the atmosphere by this disturbance, and you've basically taken off all this vegetation and all this root system and brought it right back into a desertified condition. So working with this desertified condition, you need to start stabilizing the soil again, and you can see a little bit of that happening here. We've got a little bit of biocrust starting, the mosses. See, so this is starting to hold the soil, and you can see how these different points are actually different types of mosses holding and putting some roots down and preventing the soil from moving around. Eventually you start getting different vegetation starting to colonize it once it's stabilized, because in the unstabilized area you're not going to get that. It's not stable enough for germination, and there's not enough moisture holding capacity in the soil, not enough nutrients for the plants to germinate and establish themselves. So it's this successional process that's happening here. And in terms of the microbiome, you're creating the conditions for the microbiome to reestablish itself and carbon to start sequestering into the soil. Initially, you need to stabilize the soil either by putting the grass in or sticks or using some sort of fencing so that you can stop the movement of the sand long enough for these species to colonize and start holding the soil. And this is they're very fragile. If you just touch them, they'll start breaking up. So if you have an ATV going through here, you're constantly damaging the soil and causing these problems. So just understanding that, stabilize your soil, allow the natural succession to start, and once it starts happening and the soil is stabilized, then you can start putting in different plants, different grasses that are going to stabilize the site even more, and put in all this root system to help stabilize it, because that's what's needed. And eventually, once it's stabilized, it'll start successioning back into a forest ecosystem. But you need to work with that process. So in this area, you can see that there's been less disturbance happening, and some grasses have grown and trees have started to develop. And what happens when you start getting some vegetation in this area is you start accumulating all this biomass. So it's just stopping the wind, basically. So the soil doesn't move, and then because the grasses are slowing down the wind, it's preventing all this organic matter from moving around as well. And so you're starting to accumulate organic matter, and eventually you're going to start having a good microbial community that'll help hold the soil as well. And these guys are all tough guys, so they can take very dry conditions. So understanding and just looking at different ecosystems and understanding where in the successional process they're occurring. When you understand these processes, then you're able to better understand what are the nature-based solutions that we can create with this. You have a blowout, a sandy area. How do you transition it back into a natural system, start getting the trees growing again, restabilize it so it turns back into a forest ecosystem? Yeah, there's even an orchid growing here. So some species just are extremely tough. They can handle these really difficult conditions. In an area like this, you have to consider also, because it's a disturbance, you're also getting disturbance species like this thistle coming in. And this is not a species that you want in this area, but maybe you consider, okay, it's stabilizing the site, it's helping with that transition, or else you consider, okay, it's too aggressive, it's not allowing the other native species to come in. So it's kind of a balancing act that you have to do. Is it benefiting the ecosystem enough by stabilizing the site, providing organic matter, and that's good? Or is it suppressing the native vegetation?